Arnold, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our event tonight. I am the coordinator of the MIT Addir Fellows, and I'm going to be telling you more about that in just a minute. I'll get my screens organized here. So welcome again to Distilled Wisdom. This is installment 5 of our series, and we're very excited to have you here. This is going to be a great dynamic conversation. We just got a little preview, and I think you're in for a real treat. Our topic tonight is love. We wanted to start here with this quote that's on your screen. Which is actually the namesake quote of Distilled Wisdom. And it comes from Huston Smith, the late eminent scholar of world religions, who also was the first chair of MIT's philosophy department. We think this quote captures the spirit of this series of dialogues that we've been having over the course of this year, of which tonight's event is the grand finale. And this has truly been a year where we have been in dire need of wisdom. Wisdom to cope with the pandemic, to combat racism and xenophobia, to care for the earth, to promote justice. The list goes on and on. And again, our topic is love, and maybe that could sound a little sentimental to suggest that love is going to help us experience the sort of transformation that we need. But we're actually not talking just about the sentiment of love, not just the warm, fuzzy feeling. While that certainly has its place, we need a love that is more robust, more substantial than that. And our focus in this series has been on practices, everyday ways that we can cultivate and build within ourselves and in our communities the capacity for the change that we want to be and see in the world. So tonight, we are here to glean wisdom from 2 great traditions and from 2 really incredible and thoughtful speakers on how we can bring forth within ourselves the kind of love that our world needs. And I think the Huston Smith quote also captures really well what the Addir community is all about, discovering the best of the world's religious, spiritual, and ethical traditions through relationships. The word Addir is an ancient Sumerian word that means bridge. And the Addir community is a group of 42 MIT students, grad and undergrads, representing different religious and spiritual beliefs, practices, and traditions. And Addir Fellows meet weekly in small groups to discuss life's big questions and build bridges of understanding and solidarity between the various backgrounds. Now, it is my completely unbiased opinion that it would be very hard to meet a more fabulous group of MIT students, and I think that is saying a lot. So if you are an MIT student, you could also be among the esteemed company of bridge builders. Applications for Addir are going to be open for 1 more week. So as we get started, we have the opportunity to remind ourselves and acknowledge that we are all meeting together on indigenous lands. And in particular, MIT sits on the unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation, whose land was forcibly removed by colonizers. A few Wampanoag tribes remain in Massachusetts today, and their leaders often hold educational events in partnership with various organizations, including some interfaith ones in the area. And we encourage all of you to learn more about their history and ways of supporting them. And also you can see a link to a great site, nativeland.ca, which can help you learn about the history of the land that you are on. One quick announcement, as I mentioned, applications for next year's cohort of Addir Fellows are open now, and they will be open through Wednesday. So there is a little bit more time. Okay, so we are gonna get started. And as you may know, at the end of our event, we'll be having a raffle. We've got some great prizes because you could win a book from either one of our speakers, and you can't lose in this raffle. So, and then we have the grand prize of Apple AirPods. So stick around till the end for that. Thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Monato.
Thanks, Adam. Second. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our fifth and final installment of Distilled Wisdom. And as mentioned, tonight we'll be in conversation about cultivating love in our current contexts and with the people and situations around us that we find ourselves in. And we are so excited and humbled to have with us today Greg Epstein and Valarie Kaur, two phenomenal and inspirational voices in our current time. My name is Monato Jansen. I'm a student at Harvard Divinity School and one of the MIT Addir interfaith interns for this year. And before we get started, just some details about tonight to inform you about, just our basic outline. So everyone's audio will be muted until the Q&A session. And then when we get to the Q&A, we'll allow for you to be unmuted to ask a question. So during this next hour, if a question comes to mind for you, we welcome you to submit it at any time throughout the event. We'll have a Q&A session, but you can submit them at any time. And we ask that you do so as a private chat message to Adam Reynolds, and then he will queue them up for the Q&A session. And as for today's format, we'll first start off with, our first hour of hearing from our speakers, and they'll be in conversation with each other on the topic. And then that will be followed by the Q&A session. And that's where you'll have a chance to speak with our speakers. And then finally, we'll have our raffle, and then some breakout rooms for anyone who's interested in continuing the discussion afterwards. But yeah, now I'd like to hand it over to Kat and Gerline to introduce our wonderful speakers for tonight.
Thanks, Monato. It's my pleasure to introduce Greg Epstein. Greg serves as the Humanist Chaplain at Harvard and MIT, and as convener for ethical life at MIT's Office of Religious, Spiritual, and Ethical Life. Greg is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Good Without God, and he has received numerous awards and recognitions in honor of his work towards a more positive, inclusive, and inspiring humanist movement. Greg has been a Harvard chaplain since 2004, and his 2018 appointment at MIT marked a major career transition. After building a congregation of atheists, agnostics, and allies, meeting more than 1,000 times between 2013 and 2018, Greg and colleagues shut the community down in 2018. A decisive factor was Greg's conclusion that many young secular people he hoped to serve already were active participants in a kind of congregation, but their community, rather than following a specific creed, could be summed up in a word: technology. He is now delighted to help people at a technological institute think about how to live ethically and meaningfully in a technological world, and how to be vulnerable and human when those around us too often expect us to act like impervious machines. Sorry if you can hear the loud motorcyclist outside my window. When not having deep conversations with MIT and Harvard affiliates, Greg can be found playing with his young son, planning a family weekend outing with his wife, hosting or appearing on podcasts, or writing. In 2019 and 2020, Greg was the ethicist in residence at TechCrunch, and in 2021 is a regular contributor to the Boston Globe. Other bylines include CNN.com, The Washington Post, and Newsweek. He is currently writing a book about technology, religion, and humanism. We asked both of our speakers to share a memory from their time in college. So in Greg's words, in college, I was a memory-making machine. It makes me dizzy trying to select only one of my countless experiments and desperately trying to make those 4 years worthwhile because I was terrified that I wasn't. I formed a rock band in which I dressed up like bizarre superheroes. Don't ask me about Dr. Modern. warmed up for major label acts, and got very mixed reviews from our college newspaper. I performed for the mayor of Toronto as a professional Elvis impersonator for credit for an assignment in an environmental ethics class. I got an A-, probably generous given my rapidly thinning hair. So thank you, that was Greg, and I'll pass it off to Gurleen to introduce our other phenomenal speaker, Valarie.
Thanks, Kat. It's my honor to introduce Valarie Kaur, and I super appreciate that you're here as a fellow Sikh. To have a Sikh here in an MIT space is a rare thing, and so I'm glad to be in your company. So, your words. Valarie Kaur is a renowned civil rights leader and celebrated prophetic voice at the forefront of progressive change, according to the Center for American Progress. Valarie burst into the American consciousness in the wake of the 2016 election, when her watch night service address went viral with 40 million views worldwide. Her question, is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb, reframed the political movement and became a mantra for people fighting for change. Valarie now leads the Revolutionary Love Project to reclaim love as a force of justice in America. In the last 20 years, as a lawyer, innovator, and award-winning filmmaker, Valarie has helped win policy change on multiple fronts: hate crimes, racial profiling, immigration, detention, solitary confinement, internet freedom, and more. She founded Groundswell Movement, Faithful Internet, and the Yale Visual Law Project to equip new generations of advocates. Valarie has been a regular TV commentator on MSNBC, a contributor to CNN, NPR, PBS, The Hill, Huffington Post, and The Washington Post. A daughter of Sikh farmers in California's heartland, Valarie earned degrees at Stanford University, Harvard Divinity School, and Yale Law School. Valarie's debut book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love, expands on her blockbuster TED Talk and is available wherever books are sold. We asked both of our speakers to share a memory from their time in college. In Valarie's own words, in my freshman year, my roommate and I had a 24-hour take-home final in literature. We, of course, stretched out the exam over the entire 24 hours, staying up all night, drinking ridiculous amounts of good tea. And by the time we were done, we were delirious. So, naturally, we ran to the lake on campus, rode out an inflatable raft I had kept stuffed under my dorm room bed. We were shrieking and laughing and spinning the raft until we were dizzy. We might have even fallen in the water. I was so happy and free. Thank you for being here, Valarie, and I'll pass it back to you, Manifesto.
Thank you, Gurleen.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Valarie and Greg, we're so happy and excited to have you both with us tonight at MIT virtually. And yeah, it's such an honor to have both of you gifting us with some of your time today. So yeah, thank you both, and welcome to MIT.
Welcome to MIT, Valarie.
So
it doesn't quite feel the same as when I was in Cambridge, but I miss you all. I miss the cobblestone streets. We were just saying I miss Burdick's. Like I miss all my old spots in Harvard Square. Most of all, I just miss being with people and being able to shake hands and give hugs and go deep into these questions. And so I just hope that, you know, in this hour or so that we have together, that we can transform this virtual space into a kind of sacred space. Like let us imagine the screens kind of dissolving and as if we were sitting with one another. And it's not going to be too hard for me because I've known Greg for a really long time. And so we'll go deep together, Greg, and invite everyone to go deep with us.
Can I say something about you first, and then I'd love for you to have the more substantive first comment of this discussion. But I do want to say something about you, and this is not the thing about your husband, although I'm happy to say that later, okay. Because it's an embarrassing story. But no. So Valarie, folks, is actually one of my heroes. it's fun to have a public dialogue with you for, I think, the first time, because you're somebody whose work I turn to when I think, okay, you know, as humanists, we're not really big into, at least for ourselves, the whole like WWJD thing, like what would Jesus do? I mean, it's a very good thing to do if that's your thing to do, but it's not my thing to do. But I definitely have people in my life that I, you know, if I'm going through a struggle to really like work through an idea or imagine what to do, you know, it's plausible that I might think like, what would Valarie do about this? What would she say? And I'll even, this is no joke though, like I very purposefully included in Kat's wonderful introduction, you know, I asked her to include the bit about shutting down my congregation, because it was a big turning point in my life. I had spent at least 10 years, if not really more, closer to 20 in some ways than 10, working all the time towards the goal of having a congregation like that. And when I decided that I didn't want to have I didn't decide that I didn't want to have a congregation anymore. First I decided I couldn't have a congregation anymore. And I thought maybe I still wanted to, but I just couldn't. Ultimately, I decided that I'm much happier with the arrangement in my life that I have now, and I don't want, but when I was deciding, like, I can't do this anymore. I've promised so many people I'm going to, but what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? And I've never told anybody this publicly before, Valarie, but I called you. You were, you know, you were figuring out like what you wanted to do with your organization, and you were staffing it up. And we even, if this is okay to reveal, right? This okay? Like we had a conversation. I said, like, Valarie, like, you know, what do you need? You know, maybe I'll work for you, because I love the ideas that you're putting out there into the world. And I'm not sure what I want to do with myself and my own life and my own career at this stage. And so you want to work together? And I was very, very cool and comfortable with the fact that I would be working for you in that arrangement. And it didn't end up being the thing to do, you know, for either of us, but I still feel in my heart like we work together, in the sense that I feel like you have a very clear vision of what you see in the world, and the kind of love that you want to bring in to the world. And if I could just be helpful to you in that, I'm happy.
Greg, I remember that conversation really well. It was, you know, shortly after the 2016 election. And I was in a moment of searching too. I was building the Revolutionary Love Project, but I was still kind of finding my now current path. And the thing that I remember, and we had known each other for so long before that, working mostly in the interfaith movement, right? Where I was always like,
controversial stuff.
Yeah.
We had a rough call together one day when I was at the baseball stadium in DC, and you called me, and the White House was freaking out. Anyway, yes.
So lots of battle stories. But what you always pushed me to do is to make sure that the language around multi-faith, interfaith wasn't self-exclusive, like that there were humanists at the table and secularists at the table in relationship. You pushed me, you expanded me. That moment, though, I remember you were shutting down your congregation. I was deliberately leaving, or maybe venturing out to the margins of the interfaith movement, because I felt like the core, the mystical stream running through all of these wisdom traditions was love, the love ethic. And what happened if we liberated that ethic from these traditions to say, no, this is a wellspring from which all of us can drink. So revolutionary love and the Revolutionary Love Project, where I'm at right now, is a place I feel like we're singing the same song, because we're saying, it's time to reclaim love for a new generation and a new era. And you are doing it in a way that engages technology, at the cutting edge of technology. You're meeting young people where you are. And I'm doing it in a way to offer, like, okay, these are the tools, these are the practices to build beloved community where you are. And you may be inspired from your Christian or Jewish or Islamic tradition to get here, but you can reach to literature or history or the arts to get here. However you get here, let's get here together and build out together. So in a way, we've never really left each other's orbits, have we?
No. No, I mean, I'd like to think, if we get lucky that we've got more of our work ahead of us than we have behind us, and hopefully more of it together. Yeah. So let me ask you, I mean, you more than I have been giving all over the country, all over the world, and you add in virtually, I mean, you've probably been literally everywhere, talking about love explicitly. Like, not, that's been the topic of your past year. I mean, even it was during the pandemic, right, that the book came out.
Yeah.
Because I remember having to
Yeah.
hold up my copy, and I did a tweet about it and whatever, and I remember definitely feeling very pandemic-y at that point. But so, I think I talk about love in a kind of underlying or subconscious or subtext way often, and I'm excited to talk about explicitly. But why don't you go first, though, and talk about the sort of core message that you talk about with people all over the world when you talk about love. They're really, the folks on this call are getting an expert on this topic in you, and they should have the sort of nugget of your expertise before we get really started with our dialogue.
Yeah, okay. Well, the thing to know about love is that once I went through law school, trained civil rights lawyer, anytime anyone used the word love on a public stage, in a pulpit or at a podium, and said love was the answer, Greg, I was the one who rolled my eyes. Like, I would leave the room like, love? What are thoughts and prayers in the face of what we're up against? Love as civility? You want me to be civil as they are crushing our lives? Love as a rush of good feeling? I mean, it felt like, after really reckoning with institutions that perpetuate oppression across generations, it felt like love was sentimental and anemic. And it wasn't until, I took some time away after that election, around the time we had our conversation, and really reckoned with my own life stories and the movements and the communities I have served for now 20 years, that I began to see, the problem was never with love. It's the way that we talk about it. It's time to reclaim the kind of love that was on the lips of spiritual teachers through generations, or social reformers from Gandhi to King to Mandela. They talked about love as an ethic, love without limit. Love without limit. And love wasn't a feeling, love was a verb. So I said, okay, maybe my contribution in this lifetime is to reclaim love, reoffer the love ethic for a new era. So I set about with definitions. Love is more than a rush of emotion. Love is sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, something that we do for each other, a choice we make again and again and again. And if love is labor, then love contains all of the emotions, right? Joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. Anger is not the opposite of love. Anger is the force that protects that which we love. All of these emotions I feel in the labor of loving my children. Don't you feel that with your son, Greg? And our closest relationships. Love is labor that contains all of it. So what happens when we love beyond what evolution requires? Beyond our immediate circle? What happens when we love others? Maybe even our opponents, ourselves, that we too often neglect. Then love becomes revolutionary. It has the power to disrupt social and political institutions. I define revolutionary love as the choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. So revolutionary love is now what I believe is the call of our times. And now that I have found the song, Greg, the song of revolutionary love, it is a song I will be singing for all of my days.
What really drew me in and made me place that call to you, and now that you remind me that it was in 2016, it was at a stage where, I couldn't really
2017.
2017. Okay, so 2017. So right. So yeah, that's when we talked, right? It was like early 2017, mid 2017. Yeah, because we were
summer, fall. I remember really clearly.
Okay. All right. Yeah. because we were making the decision to shut down right then, right? And I was feeling like, oh, did I call her in 2016? But yeah. So yeah, it was 2017, but it was the talk that you gave, because yes, I had known you, and you'd already been somebody that I really admired, and we had worked together and learned from you already. But then, and by the way, in 2012, I organized right around the time that I met my wife. Actually, like I was organizing it right before I met her, and then we did it in the early months of dating her, and it concluded like as I decided that I would propose to her, and we got engaged. And what it was a series, a humanist series exploring love, and we called it The Ethic of Love, or An Ethic of Love. And so it was drawing in a humanist way on exactly those same sources that you're talking about, that the Dr. King, and that a lot of the same material intellectually, like as the foundations of it. And it started like I was going to write a book called An Ethic of Love, about a sort of humanist perspective on love. And I decided I just didn't feel like I wanted to write the book, or I wasn't ready to write the book. It was very personal. I'm the kind of writer where it needs to feel exactly right for me in order for me to pick up a pen or type on the computer. And I don't mind like letting a project drop if it just stops feeling right. And so this is a book that I kind of let drop, and in part because I realized that like the reason I started exploring it so much was because I was craving love in my own personal life, and I was badly in need of it, and I didn't know how to find it, and I was actually pushing it away. Like, I won't let you love me, to the people that would keep coming into my life trying to love me. And so finding love in my personal life that year was sort of enough for me at the time. It was like, oh, okay, I actually think I know what it's like to have a successful relationship now. And so I didn't need to write a book about the philosophy of love anymore, because I kind of wanted to take some time to actually be in love and have it work out, which it did. But then a few years later, really trying to figure out like, what's my response to this Trump moment, which I realized was going to crush and destroy a lot of what I held dear at the time. And your metaphor of the womb was the perfect thing for me. It was like, yes, oh yes, that is what's happening. Yes, she's articulated the thing that is happening. Yeah, I agree with her. We have different theological beliefs, right? I'm a humanist, you're a Sikh, we maybe different spiritual or whatever beliefs, but on that point, I just couldn't agree with you more. Do you want to say a bit of, just for people who are uninitiated to that, like what is the point about the womb that you make so beautifully in that talk?
Yeah, your son is 4 now. My son was 2 when this last president took power, and hate violence against my community, others were skyrocketing. White nationalists, this is our great awakening. And I had a total crisis because I had never planned to become an activist. I wanted to be a professor of religion. I became an activist in the wake of September 11th when I was a college student, after a wave of hate violence hit our community. And Balbir Singh Sodhi, who I called Balbir Uncle, was the first to be murdered. His murder turned me into an activist trying to defend my community, my family. It was like life and death. And I had spent, at that point, 16 years in the trenches fighting, every lawsuit, every campaign, every film, just like fighting for recognition, for survival. And all this time, I'm like, all right, we're making the nation safer, and now I'm not no longer a college kid. I'm a new mother. My son is almost 2. And hate violence exceeded, the level it was at in the aftermath of 9/11. I thought, what was this all for? I was so, my son is growing up in a nation more dangerous for him as a little brown boy with long hair that he may someday wear in a turban than it was for me. So I had a crisis, and I felt like, the future never felt more dark to me. And it was painful. I was like, oh, the last time I was in this much pain was like on the birthing table. Like in birthing labor, at least the way I did it, the final stage is called transition. It is the most painful and dangerous stage. You are breathless. It feels like dying. And yet it is the stage that precedes the birth of new life. So that actual memory of birthing came to me then. And I said, okay, what if? What if this darkness in our nation is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a nation still waiting to be born? What if this is our transition? The midwife says to breathe and to push. I gave that speech, Greg, to save my own life, and then thousands of people were saying, all right, I'm ready to breathe, but how? I'm ready to push, but how? And I wanted to tell them, but I knew it was buried in here. And that's when I went to the rainforest and began to write. And in the writing, trying to find the answer, how do people sustain resilience and longevity in the long labor for justice? How did our ancestors do it? That's when these patterns begin to emerge. I read everything I had written since the age of 7. I poured through all of my divinity school textbooks and my law books and everything else that I found. I think your book was on my shelf, Greg. It's like, I need to find the answer with all these beautiful thinkers. And I saw these through lines between our various traditions that I began to say, oh, these are practices of revolutionary love. I named 10 practices. And that's how I organized my book. And I said, okay, all right, if love is labor, then love can be taught, love can be modeled, and love can be practiced. I'm back in the country now. My son is 6. My daughter now is 2. And I feel like I'm going to last now. I'm going to find longevity now because I know how to orient to life with love, loving others and loving myself. But here's what I want to tell you about that question, Greg. Is this the darkness of the tomb or the womb? The last year? The last 4 years? It has been both. There are days that have been so dark that I've like felt the ash in my mouth. There was a day I couldn't even see the sun because the sky was orange from the wildfires. There was literal ash in my mouth, not to mention the pandemic, the racial reckonings. The Atlanta was the last time I really felt it because the last time Asian Americans were slaughtered on that scale was when it was my people in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, when Sikhs were massacred. And I was there on the ground and I looked into the open caskets and to see people who look like my family. So yes, it has been the darkness of the tomb. We have lost so much. And I'm curious, Greg, if you have seen this. I feel like in those dark places, I have also seen what I have never seen before. Acts of solidarity that I never imagined I would see.
Yeah.
A line of white people standing in front of black people, kneeling in the street in front of an army of police officers, a multiracial uprising for Black lives, patrols sent down to Koreatown and Chinatown to walk elderly Asian Americans home. No one was doing that for us 20 years ago. No. It's like when people who have no obvious reason to love each other are coming together to grieve with each other, to fight for each other. That's where I see revolutionary love in action. And that's where I see glimpses of the nation that is wanting to be born. So that gives me the energy to stay in this long labor.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. I mean, there's so much there to pick up on. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions I find. Maybe it's because I'm a humanist. Maybe it's because I'm also ordained as a secular rabbi, and I did a lot of rabbinic literature and training. But I find the answer to a lot of big questions when you ask, like, is it this or is it that? Is yes. Like it's both, right? And, I mean, and you even made me think of I'm like an old 90s rocker at heart, and so you made me think of the song by a very spiritual band, very good rock band for interfaith discussions, Live. They had a song called Lightning Crashes.
Oh yeah.
So
I think that was my first single.
Really? So I sing this, so I sing like a lot of my old rock songs to my son to put him to bed at night, often. And this one, it's like, so it starts, lightning crashes, a new mother cries, her placenta falls to the floor. The angel opens her eyes. The confusion sets out before the doctor can even close the door, right? And then it continues, lightning crashes, an old mother dies. Her intentions fall to the floor. The angel closes her eyes. The confusion slips out now and goes to the baby down the hall. Right? That's what you're talking about.
You know, that was such a gift to me, Greg. That song is under my skin. Like, I listened to it like 14, 15, 16, like I nonstop, and I haven't listened to it in a very long time. And I'm realizing, like, I don't think I fully heard it until now.
Yeah, it's a good song. I mean, you know, but by the way, so talking about love practices for folks, right? Like I don't know. Sometimes I'm not sure. Like, I believe so passionately in interfaith work, and I believe so passionately in the work of Addir, bringing people together, and you know, the work that Adam does and that Monato is doing, and Alex and others, and just each you know, like, I just believe in what we're here to do so much. But I'm not sure sometimes that I believe in the idea of distilled wisdom. Like in the sense that, you know, can we really distill wisdom? I mean, I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no in some ways. But I will say that one of my humanist practices of you know, searching for love and trying to bring more love into my life and in the world. And I'll say a little bit more about what this has looked like for me recently in a bit. But one of the practices is recognizing that when people create music and art and literature and you know, books like yours, and hopefully like the ones that I'd like to create in my life, and comic books even, I find it in, and you know, TV and films like your husband makes, and you know, that to me, a spiritual practice as a humanist, where I don't have a belief in anything supernatural or beyond this world or beyond science. It is creating art for the single purpose of making the world that we have here today, now in our lives, in our laps, that is not as beautiful or as just as we want it to be, more beautiful, so that hopefully it can become more just.
You know, you can just replace humanist with Sikh, and that is how I see the world too. There's really no time spent on the afterlife in the Sikh tradition. It's not a narrative tradition. It's not about a history with a beginning, middle, and end. Our scripture is filled with ecstatic poetry. It's just poetry that is meant to connect you with the divine around us and all within us. And what is the divine around? It's Ikom God. It's the idea that we are all one, that we belong to each other. That is increasingly a biological and cosmological fact. So the emphasis on the here and now, on love, on revolutionary love, is what I call it, here and now as the meaning of life. I mean, that's something I think perhaps surprisingly we share very deeply.
Yeah.
I will say, I'll share this piece with you because, you know, you could quibble with distilled wisdom, but I do feel like, you know, in the rainforest when I was writing my book, like, I got to find some gems. You know, I'm like, oh, there's so much here. I just want to hold this gem.
Yeah.
And one of them was, you know, the story I grew up with as a kid was Guru Nanak's origin story. The founder of the Sikh faith, you know, disappeared by a river for 3 days. So distraught by the violence around him, the sun rose, sun fell, sun rose, sun fell. They thought he was a drowned man, but he was sitting in contemplation. And on the third day, he was struck with this vision of oneness, and he emerged wonderstruck. Vismad, it's called in the Sikh faith. He was struck with wonder. He could look upon the face of anyone around him and say, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." Nako beri nahi begana. Nako beri nahi begana. I see no enemy. I see no stranger. This title of my book is just Guru Nanak's vision. And he taught that all of us could see the world in this way if we just remember the truth. And there's so many ways to kneel and kiss the ground, says Rumi, right? You can poetry, prayer, meditation, but also just dance and song, like the song you just gave us, Greg. There's so many ways to feel that, to taste the truth, to remember the truth that we belong to one another, that we are indivisibly part of each other. And the more I looked into the science of it, I mean, first of all, this call is ancient. You know, it's across traditions. This idea of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, but it's the science that's been really getting me lately. The idea that we share a common ancestry with everything alive, that we have a genetic kinship with everything alive, that we are all created, you know, our atoms were created in the bellies of long dead stars, that
this is information, by the way, you know, that like, you know, as parents, both of us, right? Like, one sincerely wants one's children to know this information, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can be, you know, I can really get into the idea of sort of sharing the gospel, sharing the good news with information like what you're talking about, because it was not made readily or easily clear to me when I was a child. You know, like I didn't have like Carl Sagan being piped into my childhood bedroom, you know, sharing the humanist good news that we are the stuff of exploded stars, and that every one of my trillions of interconnected cells, you know, comes from exploded stars across the universe, and we're the universe speaking to itself now. You know, like I wasn't like given that as a thing. You know, my parents were a little more traumatized and didn't really get that kind of education, and so, you know, like, one really wants people to know this, right? Like I want you, like, I pass people on the street, and I'll tell you an anecdote about this in a minute, like I really want them to know that information.
Can I
make
tell
things
you?
easier, wouldn't it? Like, what do you
Yes.
think? How much? Okay. Scale of 1 to 100 here. Political problems that we face in our society, right? Serious political problems. I mean, I'm asking you this in a joking, lighthearted way, but on a, you know, but how much of the world's problems do you think it would solve if people just kind of knew that whatever their, you know, religious or theological beliefs, like, in addition to that, or, you know, or as an alternative to that, either way, that genetically we come from the same thing, that we, you know, we are all the byproduct of stars, that we have the same origins, that we, you know, like, what
It's not enough to know it. You have to practice seeing the world through those eyes of wonder. And can I just tell you, we are obsessed with Cosmos with Neil deGrasse Tyson in our home. And we're like, 6-year-old, 2-year-old, mommy, popcorn, Cosmos. Yeah, Friday night, this is what we do. And I love how you described it as a good news, because for him, what he's getting Friday nights on Cosmos is just reinforcing what he's getting Sunday mornings from me with the stories from our tradition. There's a resonance here. If you look at this mystical heart of these traditions, there's a resonance with what we want all people to know about our oneness. But there's a difference, Greg, between knowing it and allowing yourself to practice it, to make it an orientation to your life. And the reason is this: our societies are built on hierarchies of human value all across the world. And the oldest hierarchy of human value on US soil, of course, is the story of white supremacy. And there is a lot of power and interest invested in maintaining that story, maintaining the lie that we are separate, that there's an us and them, that white people are better, that black people, brown people are inferior, if not consciously, then subconsciously, so that we can allow the policies that detain and deport and ban and on and on and on, incarcerate. And so the idea of inviting people to see no stranger, to see you are a part of me I do not yet know, is inherently a disruptive one, a revolutionary one, because it necessitates, if you see Brianna as your own sister, if you see George as your own brother, if you see migrant child as your daughter, in that cage, what would you do?
Yeah.
What would you risk? You know, what movements would you inspire? How would you lead your life differently? What would you give up? You know, that kind of love is what I'm inviting people into, and it's inherently dangerous. It's always been dangerous in every era in human history, and it is especially dangerous now. And yet we know what happens when demagogues in power rely on our failure to wonder about each other. That's why I insist on this idea of inviting people into that way of seeing, that way of being, that revolutionary love, that love without. That's why I believe it's the call of our times.
Yeah, the dangerous part interests me, right? That these ideas are. I mean, by the way, I have come to completely agree with you about white supremacy as the founding myth of our country. It was a little maybe harder for me to see as a kid because I benefited from it. I was a very liberal kid. I was raised by very liberal parents, but I don't know that I saw it to that degree. I thought of myself as growing up in an incredibly diverse place, growing up in Flushing, Queens, New York, where I was the only white American-born boy in my entire public school class. It didn't necessarily dawn on me what I was benefiting from, though, and how people related to me and that sort of thing, until much later, until I could conceive of having my own family, and until the sort of hole in my own heart that was me feeling like I wasn't worthy of love for a lot of my life, through no fault of my parents, but sort of subconsciously it had been passed on to me from previous generations and from the trauma that both of my parents' families had gone through to get here. My mother was a child refugee, came here at 13 by herself with nothing on 2 days' notice, separated from her family for a couple of years from Cuba. So, a lot of trauma there, and even more trauma on my dad's side, actually, from the Holocaust and such. And so, so subtly, despite there being very loving people, had this message passed on to me that I wasn't worthy of love, of being loved, of giving love, of doing, of being in a loving relationship, even with anybody, unless I could kind of produce and show and show everybody, look at me, I'm special, I'm doing these special things, I'm going to be a little genius kid, that, right? Like unless I could prove it to people, I wasn't inherently, intrinsically worthy of love. And it wasn't until I was kind of getting a sense that no, because I'm a human, just like you're a human, just like anybody's a human, each of us humans is worthy of being loved. And the real final moment that drove that home for me is, my wife is lying on the operating table because she had a very difficult ectopic pregnancy that's very dangerous, and took hours and hours to figure out whether they were going to be able to get the baby out one way or the other. Finally, emergency, let's operate. And so she's flattened out. I got to, I don't want to be too intimate here, but I got to see my wife's internal organs, and they're bright red. That's all I want to say to you. They're bright red and wet. So she's knocked out, and they bring me over to the baby, and then the first 20 seconds of his life, I go over and he grabs my pinky. It's fun to do this. He grabs this finger. It's a natural response that new babies do. It's biological, but I didn't know that at the time. He grabs it, and I was like, there's no such thing as having to earn love. I finally understand. I had been to divinity school. They talk about unconditional love all the time at Harvard Divinity School. I had no idea what they were talking about. None.
Yeah.
I passed the exams, but I had no clue what it meant.
Yeah.
And then now at that moment, I got it. He will never have to do anything to earn my love. Nothing. And he can't do anything to destroy it. Nothing. And that's love. And until everybody is put in a position on this earth where they can feel some of that for themselves and give some of that to another, the world can't come together and heal and be, a supportive place for everybody, because You know, we're told that some people are more worthy of love than others, that some people should have more love than others, and it's just not true. But it's a lie that we're told often enough that when you start to sort of chisel away at that lie, or re-educate somebody about it, if they see themselves as the beneficiary of the lie, or if they feel like there's something about that information that is challenging or threatening to them, then they will defend it.
That image of you with your son is just reminding me the first time I saw my son on the ultrasound, and I said out loud, like, hello, I will love you for the rest of your life. He didn't even have a face. And here I am, knowing, feeling him and making this, like, it was effortless, wasn't it? Like, he grabs your pinky. It's not like, okay, should I now make a commitment? No, it was effortless. And I think there's something about that, parents, children, that, you are a part of me I do not yet know. Like, that feels very easy to feel in those moments. It's much harder with people who are, and yet I think it's something that we can practice. Remember I talked about, like, embodying it, right? So my practice, which I started actually when I was at Harvard Divinity School. That's the first time we even talked about it, was during our noon service, where we did a Sikh service at the chapel, and I gave a kind of sermon of sorts, and I talked about this practice that I still do. And when I walk down the street, when I see a face, even with the masks, I say to myself, okay, sister, brother, sibling, child, aunt, uncle, or maybe I'll say, you are a part of me I do not yet know. And just that, we're retraining my eye to see all others. It's not that first reaction that we have responsibility over. Our brains are wired to see the world in terms of us and them. And the stereotypes embedded here in the United States means that within a fraction of a second, before conscious thought, you are seeing a Black person and thinking criminal, or a Sikh person and thinking terrorist, or on and on and on. And so what does it mean to undo what has been done to us? You have to have conscious practice, repetition, over and over and over again. You are a part of me I do not yet know. And when we begin to see differently, then we begin to do differently. And it may sound really small, but then it determines, like, where you buy your house, where you send your kid to school, who you vote for, what policies you support, and on and on. Yeah. But I think the key about this is that wondering about others as if they are a part of our own family, it's not something new that we're trying to teach. It is our birthright. It's how we start out. And I think you must see this with your son, Greg, is that I see this with my daughter, who's now 2. It's just like the wonder comes to her easily. And I keep thinking, like, how do I make sure that it's not snuffed out early like it was for me? And I had to find it again. So we have the song. When you ask, like, what if everybody could see this well? So I'm like, I'm trying with my baby. So we have the song, and I'll sing to you just a verse. We take a walk on Friday mornings to the ocean, and we pass ducks and things. And so we sing, ants on a leaf, birds in the sky, sweet little bee, tree so high. Wonder baby says, wow, whoa, you're a part of me I don't yet know.
What's the origin of that song?
It's called Wonder Baby. It's going to be a children's book, because there's so many verses.
Wait, did you write this?
I did, because I was like, I need to teach my babies revolution.
Oh yeah. Okay. I look forward to your children's book tour.
Thank you.
That's gonna be fun. Yeah, I'm working on comic books myself, so you sort of have to create something. When you're wired like us and you have kids, you sort of have to create something in that
right for them.
So I had sort of the opposite experience. So I'm growing up in Flushing, Queens, which anthropologists, including people who were at Harvard Divinity School, like Diana Eck, were studying my neighborhood while I was growing up there. Little did I know.
Of course, yeah.
As like the instance of the possibly the most diverse neighborhood, religiously and ethnically speaking, but specifically religiously speaking, ever. like, you know, in the history of America, and which, you know, then in the history of the world, right? And I was growing up in the middle of that, and but I had this feel. I remember that this is not the thing that I'm about to admit. It's not a fun thing to admit. I'm not proud of it, but I remember I'm sitting on the number 7 train, which goes to the heart of downtown Flushing. You know, the epicenter of a neighborhood that is the, you know, that was and maybe still is, but certainly was at the time the most diverse neighborhood in the history of the world, in the 80s and early 90s, when you know, most people weren't used to the kind of diversity that we're now used to. And it goes from you know, a few blocks from where I lived my whole childhood, into Times Square, right? That's the round trip. And I would take this every day in high school, but I remember being a little kid on the train with you know, my babysitter or my mom or something like that, and looking around, and so everybody on the train looks completely different, right? Like there's no normal on the train. There's no majority. There's no such thing, like age wise, you know, clothes, well, everything, right? But I remember looking at people, and the thought that I had was, okay, who on this train is normal? Because some people on the train looked weird to me, right? So who's weird and who's normal? And I would look around, and you know, the people that tended to look normal, not in every case, but were the people that were like me. And
here's the thing, Greg. If I were sitting on that train with you, I probably would have come to the same conclusion. That so many of us, like, are raised in a culture that makes us strange to ourselves.
Wait, are you saying, like, you're saying that the people who would have looked normal are the people who looked like you, or the people who look like me?
People who look like you.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's thank you for sharing that. Right? So like right, because I was a blonde kid. My parents didn't necessarily, but I was scrupulous about speaking with a quote unquote American accent, even though we were growing up in New York. And I, you know, I was into politics, and I was the only kid that I knew that looked like the politicians on the TV.
Yeah.
Right. So that's powerful. What you
I'm
just said.
I'm watching the same TV as you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the same newspaper headlines or covers. I'm watching the same cartoons. And so I see through those eyes. And
all the superheroes looked like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All the movie stars. Yeah.
All my dolls.
It was a whole different world. It was a bullshit world, honestly.
Yeah. So my struggle, when I talk about revolutionary love, is love for others, love for opponents. The hardest part for me is love for ourselves. Because for so long, I think probably since I was a kid, there was like this voice inside of me. It's like, you're not pretty enough. You're not white enough. You're not American enough. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not enough. I've come to call that voice the little critic. And I do think it lives in all of us. Because you were talking about how, you know, the struggle of thinking of yourself as worthy of love because of all that intergenerational trauma. So I think it appears in all of us in some form. But I do think that for women of color, people of color, it's easy to get really loud when we live in a culture where we don't see ourselves loved, a culture that wants us to look in the mirror and hate ourselves because the culture hates us. So my most transformative practice, and I talk about it in the final chapter of the book, has been, you know, oh, this is what happened with my son when I was like, I will love you forever. You're so strong. You're so smart. He's a newborn. I'm like, you're so amazing. And my husband is like, why don't you talk to yourself that way? He got me, you know? So I had to practice, Greg. Remember, it's not something I could just think. I had to like make it a way of being. So I had to learn how to talk to myself differently. I have a journal. It's right here. It's always with me. I'm still doing it. 6 years, still doing it. It's called my Wise Woman Journal. I write it in every day, and it always begins like with wise woman here, wise woman says, and she speaks to me as if I were her own beloved child. Or her best friend. Oh, my love, you are tired today. It's okay. You're going to pour the tea. You're going to be with Greg. It's all right. You just don't have to be perfect. You just be real. If the children come in and through the door, it's okay. Like you're fine. You got this, love. Like she speaks to me all throughout the day instead of like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I feel better? What, and practicing talking to myself like this is actually how I began finally to learn how to love myself. I think that voice of deep wisdom resides in each of us. And actually, can I read you an excerpt from the book?
Yeah, please. I mean, as long as Adam and company are good with it. Yeah.
It's short, it's a paragraph, but I feel like it may, when I was little, people were just like, have you found Jesus? Have you found Jesus? Are you okay that you haven't found Jesus? I'm like, I don't know. Am I okay? What amazing things do they have that I do not have? I'm like, oh, they have a voice inside of them that tells them that they are loved no matter what, unconditionally. Yeah, that is special. And that is available to all of us, no matter what tradition or not that we're in. So here's page 281 from See No Stranger. I believe that deep wisdom resides within each of us. Some call this voice by different sacred names: Spirit, God, Jesus, Allah, Om, Buddha nature, Vaheguru. Others think of this voice as the intuition one hears when in a calm state of mind. Whatever name we choose, listening to our deepest wisdom requires disciplined practice. The loudest voices in the world right now are ones running on the energy of fear, criticism, and cruelty. The voices we spend the most time listening to in the world and inside our own minds shape the way we see, how we feel, and what we do. When I spend time listening to people who are speaking from their deepest wisdom, Greg Epstein, I can feel understanding, inspiration, and energy nourish the root of my own wisdom. But I must not lose myself at the feet of others. My most vigilant spiritual practice is finding the seconds of solitude to get quiet enough to hear the wise woman in me.
Taking that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow, there's so much to take in, so much to process. And I'm not sure about everyone else, but I feel like we've really been able to sort of leave these virtual boundaries and really connect deeply. So yeah, thank you both so much for that. I think what's really been speaking to me is these themes of interconnectedness and these really fascinating practices of practicing wonder, and like how powerful that approach of seeing no stranger, seeing people as brother, sister, mother. It's I had read that about a month ago in your book, and I started practicing that as I was walking around Boston, and it's really powerful, and it's really hard sometimes, which, yeah, but it's been a profound experience. And I think coincidentally, I had just read a chapter written by you, Greg, in one of my classes this week,
Did you read
where
the
you had
midwife
written
chapter?
about, yeah, it was the book, the post-colonial images in spiritual care. So I thought, oh, what a coincidence. But it was, yeah, just kind of reading that and seeing, just reading of how you're your child just reached out to you, and love is not being something that's earned, even if we tell ourselves that, love is unconditional, like it's really hard to like truly understand that. Yeah, so I'm just left thinking about a lot of things, but thank you so much to the two of you. I just wanted to make sure before we run out of time, if people had any questions, and maybe to start us off, I had one thing that was kind of on my mind in your, I forget exactly where it was, but in your book, Valarie, about I believe it was the scenario of like you were in a diner and there were these people who were really, saying these horrible things, and you approach them, and as I'm reading it, it felt like such a scary, traumatizing experience. And in the book you mentioned, you asked this question, how do we listen to someone when their beliefs are disgusting or enraging or terrifying? And I feel like, at least for me, it's been really, that question's been so relevant, in family contexts, friend groups, communities that we're a part of. And like these practices that we've been talking about are so helpful. But I wonder if you could maybe talk more about like how that experience was, and how do you get, how do you practice that when it's just so disturbing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell a recent story that's not in the book. I know this. I know the story you're talking about, and I don't think it was safe for me to walk over to that table and was like, "Who are you calling effing terrorist?" Like I don't. I was one lone woman, and so I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, when is it safe, right? So I'm going to tell you a recent story, and it was January 6th. It was a harrowing day for our whole country, but especially for my family, because we were, my brother-in-law, Shrat's brother, Greg, was trapped in the Capitol building during the insurrection. He's a reporter for CNN and locked behind the doors of his office. And we kept thinking of, we were watching it live on the screen, and as, windows are being shattered and the heavily armed men, the Confederate flags, and they're stalking the halls, and we're watching, horrified, praying that they don't find him. He's not just a reporter, but he's a reporter who's brown. So I'm on the phone with his wife, with his mother. We're
One
all
of the best
sobbing.
reporters in the country. But yeah, anyway, sorry.
Yeah. He's been through a lot the last 4 years, and it felt like it culminated with this moment of like, it was only when he was like evacuated into safety that I began like to notice what was happening to my body. And I was like, oh, this is my throat, my chest, this is terror. And the terror was familiar. How many times in the last 20 years of my own life have I watched people I love in harm's way in the face of white supremacist violence? So that night I was just feeling, so angry, and rightfully so, this divine rage in me. And my teammate called me. She's one of the ones around the time when we had the conversation who I brought on to help me build the Revolutionary Love Project. And she's my sister, really. And she said, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Yes. My parents were at the Capitol. Oh my God, were they okay? No, Val, you don't understand. They were on the outside of the building. So my brother-in-law is on the inside, and her parents are on the outside. And as much as I want to hate those people, as much as I did hate those people, I had to see them through the eyes of their daughter, who saw them not as monsters, but as wounded human beings, deeply misinformed, deeply racist. Their racism just fanned and fueled by institutions all the way up to the presidency. That didn't make them any less dangerous, but it did make it possible to see them as fully fleshed, complex, frail human beings. The wound, I could see the wound in them. I could wonder about them. That didn't mean that it was necessarily my role to tend to those wounds, but it might be hers. It might be their daughter. So all those people, the millions of people who either voted against us or railed against us or thought the last few years were okay, they're still here. They're still part of our human family. What are we going to do with all of them, right? And if all of us just abandon them, that's just recipe for civil war, isn't it?
Yeah.
So my invitation to everyone is to say, okay, revolutionary love is not the sacrifice of an individual. It is the practice of a community. And at any given time, we have a different role. Is it time to love on yourself right now? That's where I've been. My family, my babies, my brother-in-law, are we safe? Is it time to love on yourself? Is it time to love others, to stand in solidarity with others, to show up, Or are you one of the ones who might be safe enough, might have enough privilege, might be brave enough to reach out to the relatives, to the friends, to the neighbors, people in your life who need you to be in relationship with them? And here's the thing, it's not going to happen overnight. 15 years after Bulbir uncle was murdered, I was ready to reach out to him, to wonder about him. And now Greg, he's in prison. I talk to him every few weeks, and I'm reading him this book.
Wow, it's powerful. That's such
20 years later, right? So that man with a Confederate flag inside of the Capitol building, it might not happen in 6 months or 10 years, but it might happen in 20 years. If all of us could imagine playing our role in the labor to transition society as a whole, that shift in consciousness, shift in culture, that is block by block work, that is heart to heart work, and all of us have a role in that labor. So what is yours?
Valarie, because I feel like I know you pretty well, this is how well I feel like I know you. I am not going to be embarrassed to buy my bucket of popcorn. I'm not going to be too formal. I'm going to buy my bucket of popcorn and I'm going to munch it while I watch the movie version of this in a decade or two. I'm not going to feel like, oh, this movie is so sacred I can't even have popcorn. I'm going to munch that popcorn. But I'm going to like tell everybody like yeah, I talked to her about that story. But it's so cinematic. So can I just share with you like a practice of mine that happened today? That this is because your story, Valarie, it's so powerful that I want to share a much more mundane story for people who are almost intimidated by how perfect and on point and powerful your story is and how like relevant it is. How Law and Order, which episodes of which your husband has literally directed, they call Dick Wolf, the creator of Law and Order, it's called ripped from the headlines. Like your whole life is ripped from the headlines. Like a Law and Order episode. So here's one that's really not. Okay. So as you can see, folks who haven't met me, like I've got a certain, I don't know, kind of personality, right? And I, I'm pretty extroverted unless I'm not. I have moments where I'm really not, but I can be pretty extroverted. I get energized by conversations like this. I'll go up to anybody, I don't care if it's, Barack Obama or Joe Biden or somebody that is experiencing homelessness or whatever, like, I'll talk to whoever. Right. And so, I'm raising my kid that way and I spend a lot of time with him, and I was already spending a lot of time with him. I cut back on work so I could do that and be the kind of primary, like not full-time stay at home, but the parent that stays at home more often. And then the pandemic hit and that like went on to, steroids or whatever. Right. So I spent a lot of time with my kid and, and he, he has some similar characteristics. But, he's getting raised by somebody unlike my father. My father really, really just died without being able to love himself. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was able to struggle through this and win some victories for myself in that way before starting to raise him. Right. So I'm raising my kid, and and so how does a kid grow up like this? So yesterday we're out on the playground. I'm trying to I'm on a call. I'm trying to like listen in and actually ask a question to one of the top political officials in the country, like while I'm out with my kid trying to like see if he can learn how to ride his bike, and he can't, not yet anyway. And he's 4.5, and he just goes up to these kids, and they're like 8 and 7 and 6 years old, and he just like starts playing with them, right? And he feels very comfortable and confident in himself doing that, but they don't feel as comfortable or confident in him, like he's still a funny looking, because he's got like this rock star weird thing haircut that I did for him, and they're like looking at him like, what? And he's like running after them, like this is totally normal to talk to them, and they're like, yeah, we're not that interested, buddy. And I'm looking at it like, all right, should I stop them? Because they're not really being super nice to him, but they're not like beating him up or anything. They're just not being super nice. And it's like, okay, well, I want to have compassion for him, but I also want to have compassion for them, because they're probably not used to a kid who has this attitude, right? So it's not like they're really doing anything that wrong. So I just let it go, and I try to explain my best to him afterwards. That sometimes, kids who are 8 and 7 years old, their bodies are bigger, they know how to do things, but they don't know how to play with somebody your age. They just don't know how. So I try to say in a way that I hope goes in his ears, like, it's not anything bad that you did. It's not anything bad that they did. It's just, if somebody's not being nice to you, you don't have to try to play with them the way you did. And if you want to, you're entitled to try, right? And so, okay, so then this afternoon, I pick him up from school again, and he's coming out of school with 2 of his classmates. And he's very gregarious with his classmates, and he's very like, he has like that kind of mayor personality with his classmates, right? But one of them comes, and there's one that he really likes to play with, daughter of 2 writers and whatever. And then there's another that's newer in his class. And she comes out and she wants to play with him at the park after school. But he comes out and he says, no, I don't want to play with this kid. I only want to play with that kid. And it's the daughter of the writers, the kid that has more sort of like wherewithal personally. And I'm like, oh, crap. He just got excluded yesterday, and now he's excluding somebody, right? So I race over to him, and I'm like, okay, buddy, we can't go to the park if it's something where you only want to play with one kid or the other kid. Like, we're all playing together. We're all friends, or we're not, and so I had to like take him home, right? Because he didn't want to get it. And then as I'm trying to take him home, and I'm almost done, he's like so frustrated, and he's stomping, and he won't, like, I'm like, okay, but I'll take you to the park with them. And, he's like, I don't want to go to the park with them now, but he won't say anything. He won't use words. And finally, after a few minutes, I realize, and I get down on my knees, on one knee, and I say to him, oh, the reason you're not talking, you're mad at me, right? You're mad at me because I'm the one, you wanted to do something and I took that away from you. And he's like, and I realized that what I needed to say to him was like, I did what I did because I believed in what I was doing. I believed that we have to be friends with everybody, but I understand that you're mad at me, and it's okay to be mad at me too.
Yeah.
Like you're that's good. It's like, and so I guess my point is, to wrap it up, that I what are you taking from this? Because I think I think you get what I'm saying.
So happy you named anger and rage. That's the one thing we haven't talked about, and I'll just touch upon it. But like, some people are like, why do you have opponents on your framework? Isn't the goal not to have opponents at all? If you believe in oneness, isn't the goal to have not opponents at all? And I'm like, no, my love, like, you will always live in a world where there are people who oppose your beliefs or actions or desires. so far we've been talking in this conversation about big political opponents out there, but sometimes our opponents are our loved ones, like my husband or my son when he's throwing a tantrum. In that moment, for your little boy, that opponent was you. And what I have come to understand is that our rage in those moments when something is taken away from us, whether it was rightful or not, is valid. And our goal, you know, I've had to learn this, like, is not to suppress your rage or to teach your children your rage is bad. It's like, no, or to let it explode in a way that hurts others or themselves. No, the task is to be able to process your rage in safe containers. So my son and I, we go to the closet and we throw our pillows down to the ground. You know, we get it out. We do planned tantrums. We scream into pillows. We just, you know, and our indigenous ancestors knew this, dancing and drumming and shouting and screaming and sweating. These were how we gained intimacy with the greatest emotions moving through us. And your little boy was feeling that in that moment. So allowing him to say, oh, it's okay to be angry. Like, let it out, my love. All right. Okay. You got your breath. All right. Now, can you wonder about me? Why did daddy do that? Why did daddy say that? You know, and that act of wondering around, listening, that's the listen practice on my compass, is then allowing you to start to reimagine the solution together. Yeah. So this is Parker Palmer, the great Quaker author, is calling the revolutionary love framework that we have built the new nonviolence, because it makes room for rage. It makes room for grief. And it makes room for loving ourselves and this idea that no one person carries the burden of all, that we all have different roles at different times. And so I have an eye on the time, so I'll just leave you all with this, that we are about to release our Learning Hub, where we're bringing these practices of revolutionary love to life with teaching videos and music. And there's music, Greg. Ani DeFranco, Justin Tranter, they wrote music for
Ani's into your stuff, isn't she? Ani is so great. Ani is so
Yeah.
great. She's into your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, her album this year is called Revolutionary Love, and inspired by the book. So so this is a movement that we're building, this Learning Hub we're about to release, and everything on it's for free. But I'm going to give you all a sneak preview right now. There's a soft launch.
I mean, that, by the way, like for you people that aren't like 90s geeks, I mean, to say Ani DeFranco named her album after you, it's almost, I mean, it's getting close to, like, in 20 years if Taylor Swift named an album after your book. It's
that's
really
a good
like
way.
Ani is on that level.
Yeah, I know people in our generation are like, what? And others are like, so who's she? It's like, no, come on, listen. So you can find the Learning Hub. You can check it out, download your stuff, and the book all here. And if you want to stay in touch over the long haul, because we do lots, we're just like building this thing, Greg. This is the thing I'm going to be in for a long time to come. This is where we're most building communities on Instagram. You can find me there. But I just, yes, I've seen my question in the chat. We have time for one more question.
Oh, awesome. So much.
As long as you're okay if the babies break through the door.
Oh, yeah. On my end too, right? Like I have time for another. I have one last thing to say in a minute, and then my son might come in too. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we got to the questions. So thanks for your extra time. We have one question from Lindsay. Lindsay, if you wanted to unmute.
Oh, good. A live question.
I think Adam, can you?
Lindsay in the garage.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time for my question. I really appreciated this. This was a fantastic conversation, and I really loved hearing from both of you. So my question was sort of about the roles that you talked about, Valarie, and like the balance of things. So I really appreciate this idea of seeing no stranger and love for the opponent. And I've recently been getting more interested in dialogue across political differences as a way to like really affect change in our country potentially. But what I've been thinking about a lot is like, as a fundamentally limited person in time and capacity, how should I focus my attention in terms of like loving my opponent, loving myself, and loving those who I would traditionally think about loving, or loving people who I view as marginalized. So I just wonder your thoughts on like what's the correct balance of these things, given that we're limited.
Yeah. Oh, Lindsay, can I just say, like, the fact that you feel a readiness to facilitate or be part of those dialogues across difference, that is significant, my love. Most of us are not there. I am talking about revolutionary love all day, and I am not there. You know? There will be a moment when I feel safe enough emotionally, physically to sit down with even my Republican friends. I can't even be on the phone with them. I'm just texting them the last 4 years because it's been so hard for me. But we're planning our first conversation soon. You know, so we're all at different points in our relationship with our own trauma, with the world. And the fact that you are hearing the call to move in that direction means we need you stationed there. That is your post. At any given season of your life, I feel like one becomes dominant, right? And so this is why I really would love for you all to click on it. It's ValarieKaur.com, and you click on the Learning Hub, and you'll see this compass brought to life. There are 10 core practices of revolutionary love. I have kind of a real life version here. And when you're asking yourself, like, how do we choose what we need to practice in any given moment? It's not a prescription or a one size fits all. It's an orientation to life. And this compass is a tool. It's a construct. Take it if it's useful to you, where you can imagine, like, all right, do I have another in front of me in this moment? Is an other in front of me? Then that practice we call see no stranger. It begins with wonder. It opens you up to be able to share grief with another, and that use that information to figure out how you might need to fight for the other. Wondering, grieving, fighting, that's the recipe for deep solidarity when you have an other in front of you. I use this with my children all the time. I have to wonder about them because they change so fast. Like, how do I care for them? What do they need? Sometimes every day I have to grieve with them because they cry because they still experiencing, how do I lose things? And I often have to fight for them to keep them safe. So this idea of loving others, what happens when the other in front of you becomes an opponent? And it could be my kid throwing a tantrum, right? Whoops. Here we go. Yeah, tend the wound is the practice here. It begins with honoring our rage, tending to our own wounds, don't letting that blind us so that we can't see our opponent. So processing our rage, and only if we are ready then to listen to the opponent, not to change them, but to understand them and to use that information to reimagine the context that keeps allowing them to do that bad behavior. So raging, listening, reimagining is how I deal with my political opponents out in the world, and sometimes with my own loved ones, right? My son is throwing a tantrum. I'm enraged. I have to go process my rage. And then I'm like, okay, I'm ready to listen to him. What's at stake for him? And then I'm listening for what causes it. And that often means like different bedtime, earlier snack. I reimagine the culture of our home. So this stuff can be applied inside of the intimate life and outside in the world when we're talking about movements. And finally, that leaves me with, oh, no wonder this is hard to see. Okay, ourselves. I should just hold it still. What happens when you're turning the compass to yourself? That practice I call breathe and push, right? Midwife doesn't say breathe once and push the rest of the way. She says, breathe, my love. How are you breathing every day? How are you weaving breath into your day, into your labor? And then when you are ready, how are you pushing yourself in the process of your own loving yourself? Is this the time to forgive or to reconcile or to make apology? So breathing and pushing, going back and forth. And there are moments that are so fiery that a voice in you says, I can't. In those moments, you know that you're in transition. You're about to achieve a breakthrough. So how do you summon the wisdom inside of you to stay in the labor? The secret practice out here is that, because these are 9, I said there are 10 core practices. When I find when I'm orienting to my life with love, not thinking of it as a balance or anything, but as a way of moving through the world, as an other in front of me, an opponent, myself, then the labor becomes porous enough to let joy in. And joy is the 10th practice. And this, can I say hi? This is Ananda, whose name means joy. I have come to believe that laboring for a more just and beautiful world with love and with joy is the meaning of life. So all of this, I did that super fast. If you go to ValarieKaur.com, then all of this will become clear to you. You can explore it and take what is useful in your life, Lindsay.
Thank you so much.
No. No. Okay.
Valarie, I know Manito has to let you go. Can I say my goodbye to you before you go as well?
Yeah.
So just it's such a special moment to get to connect with you like this, and what I'd like to do in the future is just bring you into a humanist space and introduce your work and this new work that you're doing to all the humanists out there in the humanist community. I think that would be a real benefit to them. And I just wanted to share with it the end of that story. So what I realized I needed to say to him was, yeah, I see that you're angry at me, and you're always entitled to feel angry at me. That's, I'm your dad, and if you ever feel, no matter how angry you ever feel at me, I love you just the same. Right? It would never impact my love. And that's really, like, I think that's really what you're offering people the opportunity to do, and what we're trying to offer the people up, right? We're so angry at one another and at ourselves. And can we love each other and persist in that? Be persistent, practice that love, distill that love, not the distillation that I believe in, like the love as the noun, but I'm willing to believe in the distilling as a verb, right? To work on distilling the love that we have for people, even in the face of the anger. So thank you for being one of my inspirations about that. Say hi to Sharat. Tell him I didn't tell the embarrassing story this time. People have to follow us another time to get that story out of me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Valarie. It has been a dream come true, and an honor and a blessing to have you. So yeah, thanks so much.
You too, brother. And I look forward to the day when I can come to Cambridge and we can go to Burdick's together.
I'm coming out to LA in July. Let's talk in July. I got to see Suwatsu's new kid. All right.
Do we blow kisses? No. No. Okay. Bye. Good night, everybody. Bye. There we go.
Yeah, so Greg, do you have a couple extra minutes?
Yeah, sure. If anybody has a last question or something. I mean, yeah. I finished screen time. Yeah, you finished screen time? Oh, did you really? Here, come up here. Oh, sorry. Here, Axel, say hi to my friends at MIT, okay? Hi. Yeah. Axel, did you went to MIT, right? And didn't they have that really weird building? Mm-hmm. It's fun though, right? Really cool building, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Let's do a question or two, and then I gotta go put him to bed.
Yeah, sounds good. And just before that last question, if you'd like to fill out the short eval that's in the chat, feel free to do so for the raffle. And yeah, our last question is from Ali. If Ali is still here, you can unmute him.
While we're waiting, I just want to say, like, to me, that was really, really fun. As you could tell, I had a great time with it. But the thing that I missed was getting the chance to interact with you, Addir fellows and students and such. So I'm feeling I just had a really fun experience, and I hope it was valuable and useful to you too. And I suspect parts of it really were. But yeah, I know that if you're here at MIT and you're doing interfaith work as you have been, and you're so invested in it, like you're somebody that I can learn from, and I want to hear your story just much more than I want to tell you any more parts of my own.
I think Ali might not be there, so I think that might be it for what we have for questions. But yeah, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. It has really been a wonderful conversation. So thanks so much for your time. Oh, I think you are muted.
My only thing that I really want to plug into the chat, and this is for MIT affiliates, current MIT affiliates, is my Calendly. So this gives you a chance to, I just plugged in, like, if I've never talked to you before, you sign up for like a 30-minute phone call or Zoom with me, and we get to know each other. And then if there's more to talk about, we can go from there and continue to schedule.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Greg. Hope to keep in touch.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Yeah, that wraps up our main things. Just a couple last things. If you wanted to stay up to date with all things happening at MIT Addir, you can always find us at addir.mit.edu. If you have any questions about our program, you can always email us at addir-staff@mit.edu. I think I got that right. Adam, you can put that in the chat. We're well into the final stages of our recruitment for Addir Fellows for next year. So if you are an MIT student or know anyone who goes to MIT who might be interested in joining this next year, definitely let them know or apply. That link will also be in the chat. This formally concludes our Distilled Wisdom speaker series for this year. It's truly been a wonderful journey with all of you as we've heard and learned from leaders of various traditions. Special thanks to MIT's Mind, Hand, Heart for their support in making this series possible. And a special gratitude for all of our past speakers, Reverend White Hammond, Brian Ull, Rabbi Fisher, Sarananda Dasa, Daryush Mehta, Nada El Alami, and the Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi, and Father Michael Medas. Thank you also to Addir staff and volunteers, and thank you all to our attendees. We really appreciate you joining us in this year-long journey. As we leave this series and wrap up our semester, I hope that we stay resilient amid our challenges and finding ways to cultivate all these things that we've journeyed through together: justice, connection, gratitude, resilience, and love. So thank you all. Thanks for a great year, and hope to see you in future events.